They called it the most secure prison in Mexico, guarded by soldiers, sealed by steel, impossible to escape. But inside those walls lived a man who didn't see a prison. He saw a blueprint. This is how El Chapo turned the world's strongest fortress into his personal exit door and vanished like smoke. Because you can't imprison a man who already owns the walls. There are prisons, and then there is Puente Grande. To outsiders, it looked less like a correctional facility and more like a military base, a fortress of fear buried deep in the heart of Mexico. Massive concrete walls reinforced with steel, watchtowers armed with machine guns, and checkpoints manned by soldiers who trusted no one, not even each other. The air around the place was thick with paranoia, as if the ghosts of violence lingered in every corridor. Inside those walls were not ordinary criminals. These were generals of chaos, men who commanded armies, orchestrated massacres, and ruled cities from the shadows. Their loyalty was bought with money and blood, their enemies buried in silence. But even among monsters, there was hierarchy. And at the top sat one man, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the invisible king of the Sinaloa cartel. The man whose whispers made presidents nervous and soldiers switch sides. When he arrived, Puente Grande changed. The guards stood straighter, but their eyes grew softer, because soon they'd be looking at money, not a prisoner. The rules of the fortress were clear: no drugs, no alcohol, no communication with the outside world. Yet inside El Chapo's cell, the scent of imported whiskey floated in the air. Plates of fresh seafood and roasted meat were served as if from a five-star kitchen. Women came and went under the title of visitors, and sometimes stayed for days. He didn't live like an inmate. He lived like a king in exile, a man surrounded by stone walls that bowed to his will. Every officer had a price, and El Chapo paid it. From the guards who patrolled the corridors to the warden himself, everyone took something: cash, cars, gifts, favors. The most loyal ones received houses, others promotions. The system that was built to cage him was already his to command. And the higher the bribes went, the safer he became. They called Puente Grande Mexico's Alcatraz, but inside, it was El Chapo's palace. Still, the irony burned. This was the man who had built an empire on violence, now living in a cell lined with concrete. But El Chapo was no ordinary inmate. He never saw prison as punishment. He saw it as relocation. A new headquarters. A temporary inconvenience on the road to something greater. He kept his mind busy. Through a network of smuggled phones and encrypted notes, he continued to run the Sinaloa cartel, directing shipments, settling disputes, ordering executions. Business didn't just continue, it thrived. From behind bars, El Chapo expanded his empire in ways the authorities couldn't imagine. He turned tunnels into trade routes, underground highways stretching beneath the U.S. border. Every day, tons of cocaine moved through them like lifeblood. $20 million a month, all orchestrated by a man sitting inside what was supposed to be the most secure prison in Mexico. Power was never about freedom. It was about control. And El Chapo still had it. The guards knew it too. They saluted him not out of duty, but out of fear. His reputation seeped through the bars like smoke, intoxicating, inescapable. There was a story that spread through the prison halls. One night, a young officer refused to deliver a message El Chapo had written. The next morning, that officer's family received a visit, polite, brief, and final. The officer never questioned an order again. That was the world of Puente Grande, where power didn't belong to the state, but to the man who could buy it. The government believed the prison was impenetrable. They called it foolproof. But the fool was never El Chapo. It was those who thought bars could stop a man who owned the people holding the keys. Among the inmates, El Chapo became both myth and mystery. Some whispered that he would never leave because he didn't need to. Others believed he had already escaped, that the man in the cell was just a double. He never corrected them. He just smiled, that calm, confident smile of a man who knew something the world didn't. And he did. He knew that prisons don't hold men like him. They hold everyone else hostage, the guards, the officials, the system itself. They became his puppets, moving to his rhythm, dancing to the tune of fear and greed. Behind those watchtowers and rifles, Puente Grande wasn't protecting Mexico from El Chapo. It was protecting El Chapo from Mexico. His closest ally inside the prison was Damaso Lopez, the deputy chief of security, a man sworn to uphold the law, now chained by loyalty to the devil himself. Damaso had everything a corrupt official could dream of: money, cars, protection, a friendship that guaranteed power beyond imagination. The two men, the prisoner and the guard, shared late-night conversations over expensive liquor, talking about politics, loyalty, and the future. To Damaso, El Chapo wasn't just a criminal. He was a leader, a strategist, a man who could make empires rise or fall with a single command. And El Chapo? He was grooming his inside man. A chess player training his knight for the move that would change everything. From the outside, Puente Grande appeared calm. But inside, there was tension, invisible, electric. Something was shifting. The corridors were too quiet. The guards too relaxed. The king too comfortable. It was the calm before the storm, the silence that always comes before the unthinkable. Because even though he had everything, the food, the women, the power, one thought haunted him more than all others: extradition. Rumors whispered through the walls that the government was considering sending high-profile prisoners to the United States, to prisons where bribes meant nothing, where tunnels didn't exist. For El Chapo, that meant only one thing: the end of his empire. And men like him don't wait for the end. They create a new beginning. As he sat on his luxurious cot, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing in his cell, El Chapo began to think, really think, about blueprints, about loyalty, about escape. He had turned a fortress into his playground, a prison into a palace. But now he needed to turn that palace into a gateway to freedom. Outside, guards patrolled the yard with rifles. Inside, El Chapo smiled faintly and looked around the room that had become his throne. He whispered under his breath, "You can't imprison a man who already owns the walls." And just like that, the world's most daring escape was born. Welcome, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. Every fortress has a weak point. At Puente Grande Prison, that weak point wasn't a wall, or a door, or a tunnel. It was a man. His name was Damaso Lopez, a career officer, sharp, composed, and respected by his peers. He wore his uniform with pride and spoke of justice like it was scripture. But behind his neatly buttoned shirt and calm voice lived something darker: ambition. Damaso was the deputy chief of security, the man who held the keys to every cell, every camera, every checkpoint. He was supposed to protect Mexico's most dangerous prisoners. Instead, he became the guardian of the devil himself. When El Chapo met him, he didn't see a man of honor, he saw opportunity. He saw a soldier who could be turned with the right amount of money, trust, and flattery. So he began his slow seduction. First came the small favors: a few bottles of imported liquor for the guards' quarters, extra food for the kitchen staff, a little bonus slipped under Damaso's desk for looking the other way. Then came the cars, a sleek black SUV parked quietly outside his home, the registration signed by one of El Chapo's men. Soon, Damaso stopped seeing himself as a law enforcer. He saw himself as a partner. El Chapo never shouted or threatened. He spoke softly, with the confidence of a man who didn't ask, he expected. And Damaso obeyed. Every time the prison walls groaned in silence, every time the guards rotated shifts, El Chapo's influence spread a little further. What had once been a fortress became a machine that he himself operated. And at the heart of that machine was Damaso, the man who would open the gates of hell. It began with a rumor. In early 2001, word reached the prison that Mexico's Supreme Court was about to approve a new extradition law, one that would allow the government to hand over its worst criminals to the United States. To most inmates, it was just gossip. But to El Chapo, it was a death sentence. In the U.S., there were no bribes, no friends, no tunnels. The thought of an American prison, cold, impenetrable, incorruptible, was enough to ignite panic in the heart of the most powerful drug lord alive. That night, El Chapo sat in his dimly lit cell, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just stared at the wall, as if he could already see the end closing in. Then, somewhere between midnight and dawn, his panic turned to planning. He called for Damaso. When the officer arrived, El Chapo greeted him like a friend. He poured him a drink, whiskey, aged smooth. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the room. Then El Chapo spoke. Damaso, I need to leave. There was no hesitation in his voice. No fear. Just calm determination. Damaso froze. You mean escape? El Chapo smiled faintly. You and I both know I was never meant to stay here. It wasn't a request. It was destiny. Damaso tried to reason, to warn him about the risks, but El Chapo's words cut through like a blade. If they send me to America, I'm finished. You know what that means. For me, and for you. The implication was clear. Without El Chapo, there would be no money, no power, no protection. The empire they'd built together would crumble. And so, with a quiet nod, Damaso betrayed his oath. The plan began. El Chapo knew better than to involve too many people. The fewer the witnesses, the fewer the loose ends. They needed someone ordinary, someone invisible. That man was Cheeto, one of the laundry workers. A nobody. The kind of person guards ignored every day. He pushed carts full of dirty prison uniforms through the gates, and no one ever looked twice. One afternoon, El Chapo approached him with a proposition, one that came wrapped in cash thicker than his courage. You help me, El Chapo said quietly, and you'll never have to work again. Cheeto hesitated, but poverty makes brave men of the desperate. He agreed. The pieces were in place. Damaso would reduce the number of guards in El Chapo's section on a specific day. Cheeto would prepare the laundry cart. And when the time came, the devil himself would be rolled out of Puente Grande under the nose of every soldier in Mexico. January 19th, 2001. Dawn broke over the fortress, painting the towers in a cold, metallic light. The air smelled of diesel and dust. Inside, the rhythm of the prison moved as usual. Shouts, footsteps, the clang of cell doors. But in one corridor, everything was different. The cameras had technical issues. The guards looked distracted. Damaso had done his part. Inside his cell, El Chapo sat on the edge of his bed, dressed in the standard inmate uniform. Nothing about him suggested the magnitude of what was about to happen. When Cheeto arrived, pushing his empty cart, El Chapo stood. Is it time? He whispered. Cheeto nodded nervously. His hands trembled as he opened the cart lid. El Chapo climbed in, curling himself into the shadows of the soiled uniforms. Cheeto piled more laundry on top until there was no trace of the most wanted man in Mexico. Then he began to push. The wheels creaked. The cart rolled down the corridor. Every few meters, a guard looked their way, and then looked away. Damaso's bribes had done their magic. The cameras were blind. The walls were deaf. When they reached the inner gate, Cheeto's heart nearly stopped. A guard stepped forward. Laundry run. See. Cheeto stammered, his voice cracking. The guard glanced at the cart, shrugged, and waved him through. But just as Cheeto started moving, disaster nearly struck. The cart, weighed down by El Chapo's body, began to roll backward down the sloped hallway. Inside, El Chapo felt it, the sudden tilt, the sensation of falling. Panic surged. If the cart toppled, everything would be over. Cheeto spun around and sprinted after it, catching it just before it slammed into the wall. Sweat poured down his face. He steadied the cart, took a deep breath, and kept walking. Behind the last gate, a black car waited, its driver another bribed guard. The moment they reached the vehicle, El Chapo slipped from the cart, ducked into the trunk, and disappeared beneath a layer of old sheets. The car rolled toward the exit gate. No one stopped it. No one searched it. The guards nodded lazily, letting the vehicle pass. At 11:30 a.m., Puente Grande's gate opened, And El Chapo Guzmán, the most dangerous man in Mexico, rolled out to freedom hidden among the filth of other men's clothes. By the time the prison realized what had happened, El Chapo was already gone. Somewhere along the highway, the black car merged with a convoy of vehicles, all driven by his men, all armed to the teeth. The police didn't chase them. The police were them. They switched cars 4 times, flew by helicopter, and disappeared into the mountains of Sinaloa. From that day on, Puente Grande was no longer called a fortress. It was a monument to corruption, and the man who had humiliated an entire nation with nothing more than a plan, a friend, and a laundry cart. Damaso Lopez would later say he had no choice, that he'd been trapped between loyalty and survival. But history doesn't care about excuses. It only remembers the moment the gates opened, and the devil walked free. When the gates of Puente Grande clanged shut behind him for the last time, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán didn't just escape a prison, he escaped death itself. The world believed a man couldn't outrun an empire, but El Chapo wasn't just a man anymore. He was a ghost, reborn into the shadows of his homeland, invisible, unstoppable, and untouchable. For 14 years, he ruled Mexico from the fog of mountains and the corridors of fear, his name whispered more often than spoken. The government swore he was finished. The people swore he was immortal. Somewhere high in the Sierra Madre Mountains, surrounded by pine forests and fog, he built his new empire. Not in marble halls, but in hidden tunnels and fortified ranches up there. Helicopters couldn't fly low enough, soldiers didn't dare to climb, and betrayal had no place to hide. That was El Chapo's kingdom, a world where power moved silently and death was delivered like a message. At first, the people thought his escape was a myth. Rumors floated through the streets like cigarette smoke. They say he's in Guatemala. No, he's hiding in Culiacan. He died. He's alive. But soon, his presence was undeniable. Rival gangs began to vanish overnight. Police chiefs were found in shallow graves, their badges resting on their chests like curses. Entire towns woke to silence, the kind that comes after gunfire. El Chapo was back, and he wasn't just reclaiming his throne, he was rewriting the rules of power. From his mountain strongholds, he sent word down the valleys, across highways and borders. The Sinaloa cartel was reborn. His orders were delivered in whispers. His enemies received them in bullets. The drug trade had changed while he was gone, but so had he. Where others saw competition, El Chapo saw infrastructure. The Medellin cartel was history. The Colombian suppliers were desperate for reliable routes. And El Chapo, the ghost who couldn't be caught, offered them a network of underground tunnels, airstrips disguised as farms, and ships with hidden hulls. He turned trafficking into an industry, with himself as its invisible CEO. No more smuggling drugs in trucks or through border checkpoints. Now, cocaine flowed beneath the earth like a secret river from Mexico to the United States. Every month, billions crossed the border, untraceable, uncatchable. In the boardrooms of Washington, El Chapo was a curse word. In the slums of Sinaloa, he was a hero, a modern Robin Hood who bought loyalty with cash and protection. He built schools, paid for weddings, handed out food when the government wouldn't. People would kiss his hand in public, then pretend they didn't see him in private. He was a ghost, seen by everyone, captured by no one. But ghosts don't just haunt. They rule. And El Chapo ruled through fear and precision. He didn't shout.
He didn't need to.
His lieutenants carried his voice like a commandment. A word from him could mean life, or it could mean a funeral. The cartel's network spread like wildfire. From Culiacan to Juarez, Tijuana, and Nuevo Laredo, the border cities that became war zones. Bullets replaced boats. Kidnappings replaced justice. Every night, the cities glowed, not from lights, but from fires. Bodies hung from bridges. Messages were written in blood. And at the center of it all, El Chapo sat in silence, watching chaos blossom like art. To law enforcement, he became a ghost story that terrified even the brave. Every lead turned to smoke. Every raid came up empty. Whenever the army surrounded one of his safe houses, they found a tunnel, always a tunnel, burrowing beneath the floor, leading to some other corner of the earth. He moved faster than satellites, hid deeper than radar, and bribed more men than justice could afford. The Americans were furious. Billions of dollars worth of cocaine and methamphetamine were crossing their borders every year, and every trail led back to one name: El Chapo Guzmán. He wasn't just smuggling drugs anymore. He was smuggling humiliation into the heart of two governments. The DEA called him public enemy number one, the first to earn that title since Al Capone. But even Capone couldn't vanish like smoke. El Chapo could. To his enemies, he was death. To his followers, he was destiny. To his rivals, he was the whisper you heard before the bullet struck. The Beltran Leyva brothers, once allies, rose against him and fell. The Juarez cartel, once feared, was reduced to ash. The Tijuana cartel, once dominant, was hunted to extinction. El Chapo absorbed them all. His empire didn't just grow, it devoured. At its height, the Sinaloa cartel controlled 80% of the cocaine flow into the United States, generating tens of billions of dollars. That money didn't just buy mansions and cars. It bought silence. Judges, generals, governors, all danced to his rhythm. He had turned Mexico into a chessboard, and every piece, black or white, was his. And yet, for all his power, El Chapo rarely showed his face. He didn't need to. His myth was stronger than his presence. Children in Culiacan sang narco-corridos, songs that praised his name like an outlaw saint. Mothers prayed for his mercy. Politicians prayed he wouldn't notice them. Every rumor about him only made him larger than life. They said he could be in 3 places at once. They said he controlled the weather in Sinaloa, that rain fell only when he wanted it to. They said he could turn invisible. He didn't argue. He let the legend grow. Because a man can be captured, but a myth cannot. But myths have a price. Power like his breeds enemies, not just in the streets, but in the halls of government. Across the border, in Washington, D.C., a decision was made. El Chapo must fall. Not as revenge. As an example, the DEA, the CIA, the Mexican Marines, all began to circle the Ghost King's world. Drones hovered over the jungles. Satellites tracked his every known associate. His phones were tapped. His mistresses followed. And still he slipped away every time. Until one night, a whisper spread through the U.S. intelligence network. "We've found him." El Chapo didn't know it then, but the myth he built was about to betray him. Because ghosts can only rule for so long before the living come for them. For 14 years, he had been untouchable, a phantom who ruled through money and fear. But every ghost has a moment when the walls close in. Every legend has a final act. And El Chapo's was coming. He had escaped prison, bullets, betrayal, and death itself, but the one thing even he couldn't escape was his own legend. The world no longer feared him because of what he did. They feared him because of who he had become. A man who stopped being human the moment he turned into a story. By 2014, the myth had begun to crack. For over a decade, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán had ruled like a ghost, his name whispered in fear, his face unseen. He was the invisible hand that turned cities into battlegrounds and men into soldiers. But even ghosts can leave a trail, and this time, the hunters had learned to listen for the echo. They came for him before dawn, soldiers, intelligence officers, and DEA agents, all closing in on a single house in Sinaloa, hidden behind white walls and quiet streets. Inside, the most wanted man in the world was asleep. It had taken months of tracking, hacking, and betrayal to reach that moment. The Americans had grown tired of humiliation. Every year, billions of dollars in cocaine poured into their streets, and every lead ended the same way: tunnels, silence, vanishing acts. But now, they had help from inside. A young Colombian tech expert, barely in his 20s, who worked as El Chapo's communications engineer. He had built El Chapo's encrypted network, and when the pressure came, he flipped. Through him, U.S. and Mexican intelligence infiltrated the cartel's communication system. Every phone call, every text, Every signal bounced through hidden servers, until one day, the system whispered a name, an address, a location in Mazatlan, a quiet coastal city where tourists slept under palm trees, never knowing a ghost lived among them. The message reached Mexico's elite Marines. They moved before sunrise. At 4:30 a.m., the streets were still. A convoy of armored trucks rolled through the fog, headlights off, engines humming like distant thunder. Inside the safe house, El Chapo lay in bed, unaware that the world was collapsing around him. The Marines surrounded the property, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. The order came over the radio. Go. They breached the outer gate first. One explosion, one blinding flash. The shockwaves shattered the silence. Then came the steel door, thick, reinforced, designed for war. They beat it with rams, fired at its locks, threw grenades that barely dented it. Behind that door, El Chapo's men scrambled. Shouts echoed through the halls. Footsteps thundered upstairs. And in the bedroom, the king woke up. His assistant burst through the door, panic in his eyes. "They're here, Chief. The army's outside." El Chapo sat up, the sound of gunfire ringing in the distance. For a split second, he froze, not out of fear, but calculation. Then he moved. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't call for his men. He walked straight to the bathroom. Because El Chapo Guzmán didn't believe in fate. He believed in engineering. While others slept, he built escape routes. While others trusted loyalty, he trusted tunnels. His safe house was not a home. It was a machine. The Marines broke through the first door, then the second. The steel frame screeched as it gave way. Dust filled the air. They stormed inside, weapons raised, eyes sharp. The house was eerily quiet. They moved room to room, shouting commands, but no one answered. They had seen movement through the windows, shadows running, flashes of light. Someone was there, and yet nothing. The kitchen, empty. The living room, abandoned. The bedroom, the sheets still warm. But where was he? The leader of the operation radioed in. "We're inside. He's gone." Moments earlier, El Chapo had lifted the bathroom mirror, revealing a small, hidden slot behind it. He inserted a thin metal pin, a custom trigger that completed an electrical circuit. A low hiss echoed beneath the tiles. Then, the bathtub lifted, powered by a hydraulic arm. Below it, darkness. A secret tunnel, perfectly carved into the earth, lined with steel beams and lit with electric bulbs. He had designed it years before, knowing that one day, the storm would come. As the soldiers were battering the steel door upstairs, El Chapo descended into the earth, his escape already in motion. He ducked into the narrow shaft, his feet landing on a wooden platform. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of dirt and gasoline. Behind him, the hydraulic door slid shut, sealing the tunnel. By the time the Marines reached the bathroom, there was no sign of a door, no sign of a tunnel, just tiles and silence. They broke the door, but he was already gone. The tunnel stretched for nearly a mile, connecting to a network of underground passages that snaked beneath Sinaloa like veins under skin. Ventilation pipes hissed with oxygen. Light bulbs flickered in rhythm. Along the tunnel's edge, a small motorcycle was parked, a modified dirt bike fixed onto rails. El Chapo climbed aboard and started the engine. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. He accelerated into the darkness, the roar fading into the distance. Behind him, soldiers stomped through his house, ripping tiles from walls, tearing through floors, searching for something that wasn't there. Up above, helicopters circled the city. Streets were blocked. Boarders were alerted. But you can't catch a ghost in daylight. By the time they realized how he'd escaped, he was already miles away. He emerged hours later at another property on the city's outskirts, another safe house, another machine. His men were waiting with fresh clothes, food, and a new phone. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He just said, "They'll come again. We start digging." Because for El Chapo, tunnels weren't just an obsession. They were his philosophy. Every house, every hideout, every location had one purpose: to disappear. He trusted steel, not people. Engineering, not emotion. Machines didn't lie. While the world relied on technology to find him, El Chapo relied on instinct to stay ahead of it. He knew the enemy watched satellites, tracked cell towers, monitored signals. So, he built his empire beneath their feet. It was irony in motion, technology versus survival, digital power versus human cunning, and once again, instinct won. When the authorities later discovered the tunnel, they stood in awe. It wasn't just an escape route, it was art. Polished walls, hidden hydraulics, electric wiring, a secret hatch disguised as a bathtub. It was the work of engineers and architects, not criminals, but craftsmen of secrecy. The entrance mechanism alone was genius, a simple metal pin, hidden behind a mirror, that completed an invisible circuit. Without it, the hydraulic system wouldn't respond. The tunnel had taken months to design, weeks to build, and a fortune to fund, but it bought him something priceless: time. He had once again humiliated the governments of two nations, proving that their technology meant nothing against his paranoia and precision. Outside, the world erupted in disbelief. Headlines screamed across newspapers: El Chapo vanishes again. The tunnel master strikes. For a moment, it was as if he defied the laws of nature. To the people, he wasn't just a fugitive, he was a magician, a phantom who bent reality. But beneath that myth was a man who trusted no one, who slept beside walls that could lift and floors that could open. A man who lived one step away from capture and one step deeper underground. Every escape carved another layer of legend and another scar of fear. Because somewhere between survival and obsession, El Chapo had stopped being human. He had become a machine of escape, the vanishing man. There are prisons built to hold men. And then there is Altiplano, the place built to hold legends. Nestled in the cold plains west of Mexico City, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon, Altiplano Prison was the kind of fortress that even ghosts couldn't escape. Concrete walls thicker than trust. Guards so clean that money couldn't stain them. Watchtowers armed like military outposts. Every inch of it screamed one message: no one leaves. And yet, El Chapo Guzmán looked at those walls and smiled. Because he wasn't planning to leave through them. He was planning to leave beneath them. After his recapture in 2014, El Chapo was placed in Altiplano under conditions that would drive any ordinary man insane. 23 hours a day locked in a single cell. Lights never turned off. Cameras watching his every move. Even his shower, a tiny tiled corner hidden behind a low wall, was under surveillance, save for one small blind spot. That square meter of privacy would become the most expensive hole in the world. He couldn't use phones, couldn't bribe guards, couldn't send letters without inspection. But he still had visitors, his lawyer, and his young wife, Emma Coronel. Through them, he reached out to his sons, his lieutenants, and the only man he fully trusted, Damaso Lopez, the former prison official who had once helped him walk out of Puente Grande like it was a hotel. Now, Damaso was no longer a guard. He was El Chapo's right hand in the Sinaloa cartel, a man who understood both the world of law and the world beneath it. Together, they began the impossible plan. Altiplano sat in the middle of nowhere. Flat farmland, open skies, miles of dirt and silence. No buildings nearby, no cover for escape, and yet that isolation was exactly what El Chapo needed. His men bought a farmhouse roughly a mile and a half from the prison, disguising it as a construction site. The title was registered under a fake name, the kind of small deception that made the big one invisible. From there, the digging began. It started with a single hole 1 meter wide, 2 meters deep, then deeper and deeper still, until it became a shaft leading to infinity. The plan was madness. To tunnel beneath a maximum security prison, navigate a mile and a half through rock and soil, and emerge exactly beneath El Chapo's shower, a space smaller than a closet. One wrong calculation, and they'd surface inside a wall, a hallway, or worse, under a guard's feet. But El Chapo was not a man who believed in failure. He believed in precision. The key was locating his exact position. The cell block. The wall. The coordinates. His men needed a guide, something that could tell them where to dig and where to stop. And that's when El Chapo had his most brilliant idea. Through his wife, he requested a watch, simple, elegant, harmless. But hidden inside that watch was a miniature GPS transmitter. Once it passed through security, the signal went live. For the first time, his engineers outside could see his exact location on their devices, a blinking red, in the middle of a green field. Every day, that red dot told them where to dig. They weren't just digging a tunnel. They were drawing a map of freedom. Weeks turned into months. Inside the farmhouse, a crew of 10 to 12 workers lived underground like moles. They carved through the earth with machines and sweat, supported the walls with wooden beams, and installed ventilation pipes to keep the air flowing. A small generator hidden behind the farmhouse powered thousands of light bulbs strung along the tunnel's ceiling. And as the passage stretched further, they built a rail system, a miniature railroad made of steel tracks and a small cart mounted on motorcycle wheels. It would serve two purposes: to carry away the tons of dirt they were removing each day, and later, to carry El Chapo himself to freedom. Above ground, everything looked normal: a small construction site, some noise, nothing suspicious. Guards in the watchtowers occasionally noticed movement in the distance but paid no mind. No one could imagine that directly beneath them, a miracle of crime and engineering was taking shape. Inside Altiplano, El Chapo waited. Each day, he stared at the corner of his shower, that patch of tiled wall that hid his future. He listened for sounds, vibrations, echoes, anything that told him his men were close. He knew what was at stake. If they caught him, extradition was guaranteed. America would take him, and he'd never see daylight again. So he prayed, not to God, but to the men digging through the earth for him. Every night, he would pace his cell, counting the seconds between each noise. Every morning, he would smile when he heard a faint thud beneath the floor. Freedom was crawling closer. By June 2015, the tunnel was almost complete. 1,500 meters of soil had been carved and hollowed. The exit would open in the one place the cameras couldn't see, that tiny blind spot in a shower. He chose the date of his escape carefully. At first, he wanted July 4th, America's Independence Day, just to mock his enemies across the border. But the tunnel wasn't ready. So he waited one more week. Every day, he asked the same question through his lawyer's coded notes. How much longer until the door opens? And every time, the same reply came back. Soon, Chief. Very soon. July 11th, 2015. 8 p.m. The surveillance cameras inside his cell showed El Chapo sitting calmly on his bed, watching TV on a small tablet. A comedy show played, his laughter echoing faintly in the sterile room. At 8:10, he stood, slipped on his shoes, and walked toward the shower. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the corner and vanished. The guard watching the monitor blinked. For a moment, he thought the camera had glitched. He waited. 1 minute. 2. No sign of movement. When the guards rushed in, the shower was empty. Only a gaping hole stared back at them. A perfectly cut square in the floor, deep and dark. The alarm blared through Altiplano. Red lights flashed. Soldiers sprinted through corridors. But by then, El Chapo was already riding through the tunnel on his custom rail cart, speeding away into the earth's belly. The escape route was a masterpiece: smooth walls, electric lighting, fresh air flowing through vents. For a moment, it must have felt like flying underground. He raced through the darkness until he reached the end, where the tunnel opened into the farmhouse. His men were waiting, their eyes wide with disbelief and joy. He climbed out, covered in dust but grinning. The impossible had happened, again. The next morning, the world woke to the headlines: El Chapo escapes through tunnel. The earth opened, and the devil walked free. Mexico's government was humiliated. The U.S. was furious. How could the same man escape twice from two of the most secure prisons in the country without firing a single shot? For the people, it was something else entirely: awe. They called it the Tunnel of Infinity, a feat so perfect it blurred the line between genius and madness. Because in that tunnel, El Chapo proved something terrifying. You can build higher walls, hire cleaner guards, install brighter lights, but you can't cage a man who thinks like the earth itself. He should have stayed hidden. For months after his miraculous escape from Altiplano, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán vanished once more into the earth, deep within the mountains of Sinaloa, where mist cloaked his safe houses and loyalty still meant something. There, among the pine forests and the silence, he could have lived forever, a ghost king in exile, untouchable, unseen. But kings don't rule from caves. And El Chapo was still a king. He missed the taste of command, the meetings, the briefings, the whispered chief that made him feel alive. So he came down from the mountains, back into the cities of blood and betrayal. That was his first mistake. In the aftermath of his escape, the world was watching. The Americans, furious and humiliated, had tightened the leash on Mexico's government. They poured in resources, surveillance drones, satellite imaging, and signal intercepts, an invisible net woven from technology and vengeance. Every text, every call, every encrypted whisper, all were being tracked. And El Chapo, confident as ever, walked right into the trap. He had always trusted instinct over machines. Instinct had saved him from raids, bullets, betrayals. But technology was something even his paranoia couldn't outrun. The DEA had hacked his network once before. Now they were inside again, listening, waiting, watching. Every time El Chapo picked up the phone, he might as well have pulled the trigger on himself. He traveled constantly, changing houses, cars, and mistresses, but one mistake sealed his fate. He started talking business over a phone line his men thought was secure. What he didn't know was that it had already been cracked by a young Colombian hacker working with U.S. intelligence. Every conversation, every movement, every plan recorded. The ghost who had defied nations had finally become visible, not through his body, but through his voice. Early January 2016, agents picked up a pattern. A convoy of cars moving toward the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. The vehicles changed routes frequently, but they always ended up in the same place, a safe house on Rio Humaya Street. The house was ordinary. 2 floors, white walls, barred windows. Nothing to suggest that it hid the world's most wanted man. But there was something unusual, the constant coming and going of heavily armed men, always at night, always in silence. The signal from El Chapo's phone had pinged near that house 3 times in 1 week. The hunters closed in. Before dawn on January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines surrounded the property. No sirens, no shouting, just the quiet click of safety switches as rifles were raised. Then the explosion. The front door shattered inward, the blast lighting up the street like a thunderclap. Inside, chaos erupted. El Chapo's men opened fire, bullets ripping through walls and furniture. The house filled with smoke and screams. From the 2nd floor, El Chapo watched as his empire burned in miniature. He grabbed his handgun and ran for the bathroom, not to hide, but to escape. Because, of course, even here, there was a tunnel. Behind the mirror, a secret hatch led downward into the earth. The same old trick, perfected to habit. He crawled through the narrow passage with one of his men, emerging several blocks away through a storm drain. Once again, the uncatchable king had slipped beneath the world's nose. On the surface, the Marines fought through the last of his guards. 5 cartel gunmen were dead, 6 captured. But the real prize had vanished into the dirt. When the soldiers finally discovered the tunnel entrance behind the mirror, they could only stare. The vanishing man had struck again. They radioed it in. El objetivo ese fugo. He's gone. But this time, he wouldn't get far. El Chapo and his bodyguard burst out from the tunnel into the streets of Los Mochis, drenched in sweat, mud clinging to their boots. They hijacked the first car they saw, a beaten-up red sedan. As they sped through the city's narrow streets, El Chapo laughed. "They'll never learn," he said. His grin was that of a man too used to winning, too addicted to the thrill of escape. But fate was no longer on his side. Just 20 kilometers away, a checkpoint of federal police had been alerted. Two young officers spotted the red car speeding toward them and waved it down. The driver slowed, then accelerated. Shots were fired. Tires screeched. The chase began. Within minutes, the police had surrounded the vehicle. El Chapo stepped out, dust rising around his boots. He looked tired but defiant, like a lion refusing to bow. One of the officers pointed a rifle at him. "Hands up." El Chapo smirked. "Do you know who I am?"
They did.
Everyone did. He tried one last trick. "Money?" "I'll pay you," he said. "Whatever you want. Just let me go." But these officers weren't for sale. They ignored his offer, cuffed his wrists, and sent a picture of him to their commander. When word came back, it was short and cold. "Hold him. Reinforcements are coming." Inside the police car, El Chapo stared out the window as they drove him toward a nearby motel to await backup. He still believed his men would come. He imagined the roar of engines, the flash of headlights, the echo of his soldiers shouting his name. The seconds ticked by. Then, from far away, came the sound of approaching vehicles, dozens of them. He smiled. "They're here," he said softly. "You should have taken my offer." The officers exchanged nervous glances. The sound grew louder. Engines, tires on gravel, doors slamming shut. A convoy. But when the lights appeared, El Chapo's smile vanished. Because the vehicles weren't his. They were military trucks. Hundreds of soldiers poured out, surrounding the motel like wolves around a wounded beast. He looked out at them through the window, hundreds of rifles glinting in the night, and for the first time in decades, El Chapo realized no one was coming. No reinforcements. No rescue. His empire, the vast machine of fear and loyalty, had abandoned him. They pulled him from the car. Cameras flashed. The air was filled with the sound of shouting, boots, and orders. The man who had escaped every prison, every ambush, every law, now stood alone, his face blank, his legend cracking in real time. For the first time, he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man. A tired, aging man. When the soldiers flew him back to Mexico City that night, reporters gathered on the runway, lights blinding him as he stepped off the plane. His hair was matted with dirt, his clothes torn. The cameras zoomed in on his eyes, dark, hollow, resigned. And for a brief moment, it seemed even he didn't believe it. The king who had ruled through tunnels and terror was now standing under open sky, with nowhere left to run. Later, one of the Marines who arrested him described the moment simply. He looked around as if he couldn't understand what was happening, as if he still expected the ground to open up beneath him. But this time, the earth stayed still. El Chapo had built a world beneath the world, a labyrinth of tunnels, bribes, and fear. But even the deepest tunnels end somewhere. In that moment, the illusion shattered. His power, his invincibility, his legend, all of it turned to dust in the floodlights of Los Machos. He had escaped prisons, armies, nations, but no one escapes time. And time had finally caught him. The flight was silent. No words. No music. No sound except the hum of the engines and the rhythmic clink of handcuffs against metal. Inside, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán sat between two American federal agents, his wrists shackled, his ankles bound, his eyes locked on the window where darkness swallowed the sky. He didn't ask where they were going. He already knew. It wasn't Mexico anymore. It wasn't his land, his rules, or his tunnels. It was the end of the line. On January 19, 2017, the plane touched down in New York City. As the door opened, a gust of cold winter air hit his face. He squinted at the lights, brighter than anything he had seen in years. Reporters waited behind barriers, cameras flashing like gunfire. For decades, he had escaped walls, bullets, and betrayals. But there was no tunnel beneath the runway, no bribed guard waiting in the shadows. This was America, the one place El Chapo swore he'd never end up. A place where his money meant nothing, his power dissolved, and his name no longer inspired fear. He was no longer the Ghost King, just another inmate, a man in chains. They took him to court first. Inside the Brooklyn courthouse, El Chapo sat in a bulletproof glass cage, isolated, silent, surrounded by U.S. Marshals. The crowd of reporters stared at him like a caged animal. Some expected to see the devil. Others just saw a man, shorter than they imagined, older, quieter. When the judge read his charges, murder, trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering, El Chapo didn't flinch. He had heard worse. He had done worse. But when they read the words life imprisonment plus 30 years, something shifted in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was finality. A year later, they flew him again, this time west, across the Rockies, to a place no one ever leaves. ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. A supermax prison carved into the Colorado desert, a fortress of solitude where the nation hides its most dangerous men. No bribed guards. No weak walls. No tunnels waiting beneath the floor. Just concrete, steel, and silence. They led him into his new cell, 7 feet by 12, a gray box lit by a single bulb. A narrow slit of a window let in a slice of sky. He could see the sun, but not the horizon. The walls were thick enough to swallow sound. 23 hours a day, he sits alone. No phone calls. No visits except from lawyers. No whispers from his cartel. The man who once commanded armies now talks to no one. His meals slide through a slot in the door, silent, mechanical, routine. He eats, he sleeps, he waits. The only footsteps he hears are those of guards who don't know him, don't fear him, and don't care who he was. Sometimes, late at night, he imagines the sound of digging, the distant echo of a shovel scraping earth. For a second, he believes his men are coming, that a tunnel is being carved beneath his feet once more. Then the air conditioner hums, and the illusion fades. There are no tunnels here. Not under Florence. Here, the walls are the mountain. It's strange, the way silence can become heavier than noise. In Mexico, El Chapo lived surrounded by sound. The roar of engines, the laughter of soldiers, the rattle of gunfire, the thud of money hitting tables. Now, there is nothing but the ticking of time. Every second feels like a hammer striking stone. He once said, "Power is freedom." Now, power is the memory of a man who had it. They call ADX Florence a clean version of hell. Each cell is designed to erase identity. White walls, steel fixtures, no color, no warmth. Prisoners live in their heads, because it's the only place left to go. And that's where El Chapo spends his days now, trapped in his memories. He replays the past like a movie only he can see, the moment the laundry cart rolled past the gate in Puente Grande. The sound of the hydraulic lift beneath the bathtub. The wind on his face as he sped through the tunnel of infinity. He can almost smell the dirt, the fuel, the freedom. And then he opens his eyes, and the walls are still there. No escape. No empire. No echo of his name. Only the quiet hum of the fluorescent light above him, his last companion. His lawyers visit sometimes. They talk about appeals, about conditions, about the outside world. He nods, but his mind is elsewhere, somewhere in Sinaloa, perhaps, where the sun still burns over his mountains. Some nights, he dreams of his wife, Emma, and his twin daughters. He dreams they're visiting, that they're smiling through glass, that he can touch their hands. But when he wakes up, his palms are cold and empty. The silence greets him again. The silence of defeat. It's a strange punishment, really. The man who dug tunnels now lives in a box. The man who ran empires can't walk 10 steps without permission. The man who controlled the world through fear can't control his own light switch. For the first time, he's truly imprisoned, not by guards or concrete, but by the weight of his own legend. He became a myth that consumed the man beneath it. And myths don't escape. They just fade. Sometimes, when the lights dim, he whispers to himself, words the guards can't quite hear, a confession to the silence. How do you escape from yourself? No answer ever comes. Because even here, in the loneliest cell in America, El Chapo knows one truth. He can break walls. He can outsmart governments. But he'll never dig deep enough to escape his own shadow. In the world outside, his empire still breathes, fragments of the Sinaloa cartel fighting, bleeding, surviving. His sons, the Chapitos, carry his name, but not his control. The streets that once belonged to him now run red with a new generation's ambition. Power, like blood, never disappears, it only changes hands. And in some twisted way, maybe that's his real legacy. The cycle he began will never end. In ADX Florence, the days blur together. The seasons pass unseen. Sometimes the snow falls outside his narrow window, white flakes against a gray sky, fleeting, delicate, free. He watches them until they melt away, until the glass is just glass again. Then in the silence he smiles, a sad, knowing smile. The world's greatest escape artist finally trapped inside his own shadow. If power, fear, and freedom all have a price, how much would you pay to never be caught? Subscribe to Crime Syndicate Tales, where every legend ends the same way, not with freedom, but with the weight of what they can never outrun. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Click on the screen to watch the next one.